Hello, everybody, and welcome to the next Future Leaders Group OpenUK training session. A little bit about the OpenUK Future Leaders Group. We are a collection of individuals who are interested in open technologies, including open source software, open hardware, and open data. It includes a wide range of people that work in technology, intellectual property, outsourcing, procurement, data, coding, and innovation, as well as private practice lawyers and in-house counsel that work in the technology sector and related fields. Now, we operate under the direction of the OpenUK Legal and Policy Committee, and we have a clear purpose to bring together and develop future leaders in legal and policy matters relating to open technology and to support and further the mission of the Legal and Policy Committee. The Future Leaders Group is currently co-chaired by me, Robert Grinnells, I'm from Phil Fisher, and Katie Gibson from Bristow's, and we're both lawyers advising on technology and commercial matters. The group is always open to new ideas and to new members, whether getting involved in all of our activities or just dipping in and out of our various projects. I'm delighted today to say that we're joined by James Maddison and Josh Dario. They're both consultants at the Open Data Institute. Over to you, James and Josh. Thank you for joining us today.
Great, thank you, Robert, and thank you everyone for joining us for our talk. My name is James Maddison. As Robert said, I'm a consultant at the Open Data Institute, or the ODI as we call it. I'll hand over to Josh to introduce himself.
Why, thank you, James. Hi, I'm Josh. I'm a consultant at the ODI as well. Today, James will be talking more on the public sector side of things in open innovation, and I will join in about halfway through to talk about the private sector.
Brilliant. So, first of all, who are the ODI? A lot of people haven't heard of us. We tend to fly under the radar a bit sometimes, I think. But the Open Data Institute was established in 2012. We're a London-based not-for-profit, and although we're based in London, we work on a global scale. We're a very mission-driven organisation, so our aim is to hopefully contribute to a world where data works for everyone. Very ambitious, but the way that we try and achieve that is working with companies, with governments, to build an open and trustworthy data ecosystem. This is our theory of change. There's a lovely GIF there for everyone to look at, which will keep changing, so hopefully it won't distract you too much. But the main thing I want to point to first of all is this middle pillar. This is how we see value being created from data. So good stewardship of data, so that's the collection, maintenance, and kind of movement of data. Channeling that through a number of creators who can do interesting and important stuff with that data, creating solutions, services, products, and then taking that to a decision-making level, so helping those people in decision-making positions to make better decisions through the insights that come out of these products and services. And ultimately that leads to positive impact. There are two scenarios where sometimes this can skew away from the positive impact. The first one that we look at is on the left. We call it data fearing. And this is where citizens or customers or organizations are worried about sharing data because they perceive it to be have potential risks attached to it. It could be that they see the data as very personal, or they're worried about compromising a certain law like GDPR. And what we try to do is encourage organizations to think about trust in order to push people back towards increasing access to data and ultimately leading to that positive impact. And we do this through encouraging organizations to think about ethics, to think about how they can use data in a way that's equitable, and also to engage with their customers or their citizens throughout that whole process of data use. And then the other scenario which we see is what we call data hoarding. And that's where businesses or organizations hold on to data because they see it as commercially valuable or important to them, but not necessarily important to others. And we try to encourage organizations to move away from this way of thinking by being more open with data, and thinking about how they can work with others to be more innovative, to create new solutions that they might not necessarily be able to provide themselves. And also to think about increasing capability and skills around data and investing in data infrastructure to make data use easier and more efficient. Whilst we are the Open Data Institute and we try and place an emphasis on being as open as possible, we recognise that not all data should be open. And to help us and organisations that we work with to think about where data sits on this spectrum, we call the data spectrum, whether it should be closed whether it should exist in the shared space or whether it should be open, we use this tool. As I mentioned, it's called the data spectrum. Starting from the left, you have the closed end, which is data that is essentially held by one person or one organization and not really shared with others. An example of this might be a PIN number. You wouldn't want to go around sharing your PIN number with everyone, and for good reason, obviously. This shared space is where the ODI actually operates most of the time. This is where we start to think about how we can make data more open, not necessarily open data, but as open as possible. As I kind of mentioned, that's a phrase that we use quite a lot. And then we do try and push people where possible towards open data, which is data that anyone can access, use, or share, and is published under an open license. So I'm going to talk to you about open innovation in the public sector. This is an area that we started to kind of really focus on about 3.5 years ago at the start of our research and development program. And this was one of the projects that we were looking at. We think public services are a really important part of open innovation in the public sector. At a local level and also at a national level as well, but we tend to have looked more at local. Authorities are responsible for supporting positive social and economic impact by providing essential services for citizens such as waste collection, education, housing, planning, etc. And so, as you can see, I've put in that middle pillar of our theory of change because I think that it really can be applied to that theory of change in that the services are trying to create positive impact. And we believe that better use of data can help make these services more cost-effective, more efficient, and more accessible to citizens if they move through that data value chain towards a positive impact. We started very much looking from a research perspective at public services. The thing we really wanted to understand was how open data was being used in the public sector to enable public services or to make public services better. And so we did a bunch of research, we did desk research, we did interviews. We also ran our own stimulus fund, which was essentially funding a number of local authorities to test out some new open data service delivery models. And essentially what we found was that there are a number of things that need to be in place in order to use open data, but data more broadly in services. So things like working with other people in your kind of ecosystem and understanding who those people are. Ensuring that you've invested in data infrastructure, so making sure that the underlying layer of things that you need in place to help use data is there. Adopting existing standards for data. That's important because otherwise people won't be able to collectively use data sets or link data sets together. Bringing senior management champions on board was a really important point, and creating more peer networks as well. So working with other local authorities to try and identify where things have been done before. From there, we really identified 3 common patterns that local authorities and also national government bodies as well were using to enable better public services with data. The first one of those was to actually increase access to data about services, which supports innovation and creates trust with citizens. That could also be just publishing data as a service as well, if it's a data set that's highly in demand. Secondly, we looked at using data more effectively to improve the way that services are run, which creates improvements and efficiencies, mostly internally for a local authority. And lastly, we looked at using data to make better decisions. So that's policy decisions, but I like to refer to it as just decision making. And there's an example that kind of hits on these 3 patterns, which I wanted to point out to you. So we have a number of case studies on our website, which all look at local public service innovation or public sector innovation. There's around 23 of those, but I don't have time to go through all of those, so I'm just going to pick one. And this was where we funded Oxfordshire County Council to look at evaluating cycling infrastructure in Oxfordshire. What they did was work with community cycling groups to map cycle routes in Oxfordshire by giving them an audit tool that they would go around and use to actually map out their route to work or their route home or when they go and see their friends. Then they published a map of that data once all of the routes have been mapped out. They published the map. They published the raw data as open data as well, so anyone can access, use, and share it. And that's a good example of how the local authority is increasing access to information about a service or increasing access to the raw data itself. And then they use the map, so they use this thing that they created to actually make decisions internally to decide whether to invest infrastructure in certain areas or invest in infrastructure in certain areas within Oxfordshire. And lastly, the initiative has been something that a lot of other local authorities have looked to, thinking that it's a useful thing to do. It's relatively cost effective as well. And so it's currently being scaled to Buckinghamshire County Council. But unfortunately, this kind of change isn't something that just happens. It's not something that a lot of local authorities can just decide to do, and everyone's on board with it. There are a number of barriers to change that we found from our conversations with people, from different workshops that we've run with both service designers, service delivery managers within local authorities, and also people from the data communities around those organisations. This ranges from things like data skills and knowledge, so having people in those organisations who understand the kind of fundamentals of how data can be used, what value can be created from data. There's a common issue a lot of the time around accessibility and findability of data sets. A lot of local authorities in particular have strange legacy systems, which mean that they can't see everything in a kind of centralized place, and it's sitting on someone's desktop somewhere or on a memory stick somewhere, and also finding out who is accountable and who actually manages or stewards the data can also be quite difficult as well. There's often an issue with not being able to find evidence about the value and impact of other data initiatives. So lots of local authorities don't necessarily publish information about what they've been doing, not necessarily for the wrong reasons. It might be a capacity issue, for example, but it means it's more difficult to find out what other organisations have been doing. And cross-department working is also often an issue with actually bringing kind of the data element to services. And the biggest two barriers that we found, one of them obviously around limited funding. This could be limited funding against the organisation's budget for the year, and it just doesn't sit within the priorities. But it could also be limited funding from the perspective of the local authority just doesn't have money to invest in data initiatives. And the main one is looking at engagement and buying from senior management. So actually selling in the idea of changing a service to be more data enabled can often be very difficult in local authorities. So to help local authorities to essentially start on their journey of thinking through data enabled services and thinking whether it might be something that they can apply to a particular idea that they have, we created the Data and Public Services Toolkit. We worked with a number of local authority employees, service designers, data organisations to pull this toolkit together. Some of the tools were existing things that the ODI had already created for other purposes, but still served the context. And there are a couple of tools in there that were created specifically for this piece of work as well. The toolkit is free. It's designed to be collaborative. It's hopefully non-technical, so people who come from a less kind of data or technical background can sit around a table and actually use it with others. And it includes a number of tools and case studies, which are all available on our website, and we'll share all of the links to resources after the talk. You should use the toolkit with a number of other people from across your organisation. I've just put some examples in here of roles that exist in a number of local authorities, and these are the kind of people that we encourage to get round the table. The idea of the toolkit is to try and one of the barriers that I talked about, the one about better cross-department team working. One of the ideas with the toolkit is to try and lower that barrier and get people around a table to talk about using this toolkit. Obviously, in recent times, you can't get people around tables, but we have a number of online tools as well that you can use to try and replicate the experience of sitting around a table and doing this in person. I think thinking about who needs to be in those sorts of sessions as well helps you to think about data skills and knowledge that you need, and whether you actually have those in-house or whether you need to go elsewhere to try and find someone to support you with that. The toolkit really pivots around this data and public services business case canvas, which is is designed to help you with the engagement and buy-in, and there's a number of steps involved in using this. We usually take people through this 5-step process. The first one is looking at aims and needs of the service. So looking at what the service will do, who it's for, and how will it help. How does it fit with your organization's goals, and what other organizations are involved? And then once you've identified those kind of stakeholders that are involved in your project or service data ecosystem, then you'll start wanting to think about what data you need and where it comes from. So to help you do that, there are some sections on the business case canvas that prompt you to think about the data and the stakeholders. But really it links to this data ecosystem mapping tool that we've created to help people think through some of this stuff. It's really to help you address that barrier of easily accessible and findable data sets, so actually working out where things exist within your data ecosystem, and also to clarify who is actually accountable for the management of those data sets as well. So how do we map a data ecosystem? We'll take you through the kind of generic steps because I'm aware of time and my part of the presentation is slightly longer than Josh's as well, so I don't want to run into his time. So first step, as we've mentioned, you would map out the actors or stakeholders within your ecosystem using circles. That could be both internally within the local authority, that could be other organizations that you work with, such as a service design agency or a technology provider. And you'll also want to map out some of the kind of core services that you're talking about when you're going through this process as well. Secondly, you'll start to map out the data flows. You want to start with data that's shared or used by different actors, and then draw lines and add labels to indicate what this data is, what the data sets are. You can also start to think about other types of value that are being provided alongside the data flows. So that could be funding, for example. It could also be services going from one place to another. And then once you've thought about those kind of tangible things that are moving around the ecosystem, then you'll start to want to think about the insights that are being generated through interactions between stakeholders. So this could be things like feedback from users, feedback from citizens about a particular service and how it works for them. It could be insights being created from a company who's doing some data analytics work for you. It could also be from businesses in local area telling you that they need access to data from a particular part of the local authority. And then lastly, once you've mapped everything out, start to think about the potential opportunities that come out of this mapped ecosystem. You might also want to look at some of the blockers and how you might be able to unpick some of those blockers. But ultimately, the data ecosystem mapping session is about finding opportunities and taking the next steps from there. Once you've mapped your data ecosystem, then you'll want to start thinking about how that data use is actually affecting other people. So it's all well and good deciding that you're going to go ahead with something because you've identified who the stakeholders are and you know that you can get access to data sets and you think you can do this project. But ultimately, if it's going to affect someone in a negative, harmful way, then you won't necessarily want to go ahead with it. On the business case canvas, it helps you to just think about the ethical implications of the service and how to minimize the negative impacts and maximize the positive impacts. But as with the data ecosystem mapping tool, we have another tool called the data ethics canvas, which helps you to think through ethics and compliance and thinking about just because something's legal, it doesn't mean it's ethical. Something that I think is important in here is it doesn't necessarily address one of those barriers that we found, but it does address that data fearing angle on the theory of change. So it does try and push organizations to think about being trustworthy and addressing equitability and data ethics as well. There are 4 different sections to the data ethics canvas. The first one just goes back to the data, helps you to think about what data you're talking about, where the data sources are, what your obligations are with that data, should you use it, or is there a reason not to use it, what are your rights and what are the rights of citizens as well, and finally, what limitations does the data have, so are there quality issues with it, for example. Then you move on to the really meaty stuff. This is the stuff that really kind of it has the most impact, as it says on the screen, impact. And at this point, you'll want to think about, why are you using the data? Why are you creating this service? How do you think this is going to positively impact people? And do you see there being any negative impacts as well? And if you do see there being negative impacts, then how do you minimize those negative impacts? You'll also want to think about engagement. So how do you engage with other people? Are you clearly communicating why you're doing this project or service redesign work? And can you be more open about it? So can you publish blogs about what you're doing? Can you talk about the data? So can you publish the data itself openly, or can you at least publish the metadata from the service? And can you publish any findings that you found, maybe through some of the user research that you've done as part of the work? And lastly, the kind of more functional stuff. You also need to think about how you're going to take some of this thinking forwards. So it's not just about filling in the data ethics canvas and saying, yes, I've done it, ethics is done, we've completed it, we are an ethical organization. You also want to think about how, on an ongoing basis, you're going to reconsider how you approach ethics for this service. It's not something that you just want to do once, it's something that you want to look at over a period of time and see how things have changed as the service goes on. And you'll also want to document what your actions are going forwards as well. And there's just a full picture of how the data ethics canvas looks. Next, you need to think about the business plan. It's nice having grand ideas of creating positive impact and a service that works for everyone, but realistically it needs to work and be cost effective and not drain all of the local authorities' resources. So you want to think about cost and investment and weigh that up against the justification for the project. Why are you doing this project? Is it really, really important? Does it need to be done at this time? And you'll also need to make a kind of rough estimate on savings and revenue. If this is something you think might generate revenue, have a stab at working out how much that might be. If you think it's going to save you money in other areas, again, just think about how much that might be, because these are all things that are going to have an impact on your final business case. And also think about timelines as well. And to help you think through some of these aspects, as I mentioned earlier, we've created a number of case studies. Some of them are in the Data and Public Services Toolkit guide and checklist, but there's a number of them on our website, which we will link to at the end of the talk. This really just helps with that evidence angle, so being able to point to value and impact created in other areas. And it also might help with limited funding issues, because you might see how other organizations have done something, have implemented something in a cost-effective way, and you might be able to do that with less funding than if you tried to start a new initiative yourself. And lastly, you want to also think about, or this is something that we encourage organizations to think about, you want to think about being open. Could your service be useful to others? Could it be useful in another area? Could it be useful to other cities or citizens? And really, this is all about approach. So this is all about being open. This is the kind of bread and butter of the ODI. And to help people think through this, we have this how to design to scale checklist. So when designing and delivering services, as I said, we encourage people to be open as possible. Publishing open data, source code information can help others to replicate or scale a similar service to their area, or create something new and useful to citizens in your area as well. So you could take a service and take elements of it and spin it out for a different purpose. Being open to collaboration can also help local authorities to work with others who have relevant skill and experience, which means that services can be designed to better meet the needs of your community. That kind of helps to address that data hoarding angle, because you're approaching others, you want to work with others to help kind of improve your remit, but also to help them improve what they're doing in their context as well. And this again also might help with the limited funding angle, because you can go and say, we're working on this service, it's really important to us, and another local authority might say to you, oh, that's really interesting, we're actually thinking about doing the same thing. I can think of a number of examples like the Data Mill North initiative, which is a number of local authorities in the north of England sharing data to one specific portal, which actually saves a lot of cost for all of the organisations involved. So that's it for the kind of public services angle. It's something that, as I said, is a really important starting point. But public services don't just make up the entirety of what local authorities need to deliver for their citizens, or how cities are set up as an ecosystem. Organisations need to work together to access, use, and share data in order to create visible and trustworthy outcomes that work for their city. As I'm going to keep pointing out, visibility kind of links to that openness angle, and trustworthy obviously links to the trust angle that we talk about. And you need to be able to create those threads throughout a city ecosystem in order to be able to deliver positive outcomes. We've explored some of this thinking through our Open Cities project, which is slightly more recent than the public services work that we've done. We finished up at the end of last year, and this year we're looking at more kind of practical application. And the Open Cities project really focused around kind of smart cities versus open cities. So open cities aren't a new idea, but they've predominantly taken a back seat to something that's more popular, which is the smart cities narrative. And our work has tried to explore how the value of open can be harnessed before decisions to become a smart city are undertaken. What we mean by that is that we believe cities already have a kind of broad spectrum of data available to them to help them make decisions and answer questions, but the resource is not always used properly because it might not be clear where that data is, how you can access it. And the ease of turning to new technologies rather than looking at what exists is often considered an easy win, because you can go and implement a new system that gets headlines and everyone seems to buy into because it seems groundbreaking, but there might be some fundamental stuff that you've missed, which could have saved you a lot of money and time as well. In order to test this theory, we went out, spoke to lots of people, did our user research, did some desk research as well, and also worked with the toolkit that I've just mentioned to see if we can help cities map existing data and use the other tools to think about how the data can be accessed, shared, used ethically to improve how cities are working around data and around specific projects. I should say that we're not necessarily discouraging people from trying to become smart cities, but that fundamentally you need to look at how data is used before you turn to exciting new tech to solve your problems. Data infrastructure is a really important part of creating this openness. Cities are now capable of collecting vast amounts of data about the way that citizens interact with local services or businesses and each other. And this data can be used to inform better decision making in a number of areas. But in order to get the best value from data, cities need to build this strong data infrastructure. So that's the people, processes, and technology that support the collection, access, use, and sharing of data. And our Open Cities research has kind of pointed us towards doing this with open principles in mind, such as open government, open data, open standards, open source, and open innovation. And I'll take you back to the data spectrum. A lot of city data exists in this closed to shared region, and really we want to encourage organizations to push more towards open. So that doesn't necessarily mean open data, but it means being as open as possible and sharing data where possible. And again, I'll take you back to these two tools. This is what we use in the cities context to help cities think through how you understand where data is within a city, usually around a specific project, and then use the data ethics canvas to understand how that data is being used, what the implications are, and how you can steer people towards more of a positive impact framing. That's pretty much it from me. If you think the tools would be useful, please use them. As I said, they're free, they're openly licensed, so if you want to change parts of it to serve your particular purpose, then please do that. We do have 2 workshops that we run in this space. One of them is the Getting Started with the Data and Public Services Toolkit, The other one is the Open Cities Workshop. Obviously, if you want to find out more about those, please get in touch with us. I'm just going to skip over these two slides, which are explainers of what they are, because I'm pretty sure I'm over time. But here's a list of resources as well that we'll share afterwards around the kind of open innovation in the public sector work that we've done. And now, over to Josh.
Thanks so much, James. All right, so I'm going to try this share screen, smooth transition. I apologize to everyone and YouTube posterity more broadly if this doesn't work super well. Loading, okay. Thumbs up, James, thank you. All right, that pointer. So, thank you, James. My wonderful colleague took you through the tools and their implications for the public sector. Now, I will detail some real-life examples from our private sector case studies and the data toolkit for business, where our tools can help businesses realize value from sharing data. But first, some history of the ODI in the private sector. So in 2015, we launched a study in the UK to understand the impact open data was having. In this, we identified and analyzed 270 open data companies. So that's companies that use, produce, or invest in open data. The companies we studied had an annual turnover of over £92 billion and over 500,000 employees, showing us how important open data was to the private sector. This level of value has only grown since. You fast forward to today in our multi-year R&D program, of which we're in the 4th year. Part of this program was used to better understand both open data and specifically data sharing in the private sector better. We've learned that despite the proven gains from sharing data, many businesses still aren't sharing. In fact, our recent YouGov survey has shown that just 27% of British businesses are sharing data, but half agree that increased access to data would help their business grow. Much of this is due to issues around data discovery and access, trust and transparency, as well as not knowing how to generate value from data sharing. To help businesses, we developed a toolkit that includes the data ecosystem mapping tool and data ethics canvas shown earlier. It also has the data skills framework, as well as some case studies that show how businesses have realized different types of business value from data sharing. And we'll go through some of these today. So as James mentioned, our data ecosystem mapping tool can help you discover where useful data is held, how it is being accessed and shared, and most importantly, especially for businesses, how it is being used to create value. Data ecosystem mapping works just as well for private sector organizations as it does in the public sector. By mapping your business data ecosystem, you can understand the space you play in better and find new opportunities for your data strategy and overall business strategy. Much like in the public sector, the data ethics canvas helps businesses think through the potential outcomes of sharing data, both negative and positive. It doesn't tell you what your business should do, but it asks key questions that should prompt discussions internally on how best to manage data that your business accesses, uses, and shares. The final tool in this toolkit, though, is the Data Skills Framework, a tool that anyone can use to understand the skills needed to work with data. It helps you analyze your current approaches to data literacy, identify imbalances of skills, and address gaps in data literacy across your organization. Our free online modules can help take people through the steps needed to improve on their skills once they understand their gaps, and we encourage you all to check them out. Ultimately, these tools are used to ensure an organization can realize business value. In our research, we've identified 7 different types of business value that can be achieved through data sharing that are up on this wheel here. There are probably more. Today, we'll take a closer look at 5 of these through case studies from the toolkit itself. So the first is open innovation. Open innovation means increasing access to data with third parties to help address a specific business challenge. This could be simple data sharing or complex ecosystem building. So for the example today, we're going to talk about Griner, a packaging company that wants to analyze its inventory data for cost savings. However, Griner is unsure about the skills it has internally for high-quality analysis. By using the data skills framework, Griner can identify what skill sets it might need and realize they currently do not exist in-house. By embracing open innovation through improved data sharing, Grindr can use third-party capabilities to maximize the value of data they hold. The ODI helped Grindr find an organization with capabilities to match its needs. Through Data Pitch, our open innovation program, OBU, a data innovation company, collaborated with Grindr. OBU utilized inventory data from Grindr's production plants to look for supply chain efficiencies. From this partnership, OBU discovers that Grindr can reduce their fixed asset investment by 35%. This is direct tangible value to the business by embracing data sharing. And across the whole ecosystem, data providers saw themselves participating in more data sharing in the future. The next business value we'll look into is supply chain optimization. So in this case, Airbus wants to improve efficiency of wing design in order to reduce cost. Airbus currently shares design data at intervals over the design process with its partners. Airbus could use the data ecosystem mapping tool to explore its current data ecosystem and look for opportunities. James provided you a generic walkthrough before, so let's go through a real-life example of data ecosystem mapping in the private sector together. So in this data ecosystem we will build together, we will look at a map that represents how Airbus and its partners share data to design wings. First off, you want to think of the actors in your ecosystem. We use data-specific terms like data stewards, intermediaries, and beneficiaries, but you may just want to think in terms of the business data ecosystem like suppliers and customers. We encourage you to ask yourself useful prompts like, what role does your organization play? Who are your customers, suppliers, and partners? And where does data innovation take place in the ecosystem? So today we'll start from the perspective of Airbus. It has design partners, Rolls-Royce and GK in aerospace. It also has academic partners, the University of Cambridge and Cranfield University, and of course its customers, the airlines. So now that we have some of the actors, we're going to start mapping the flows and exchanges in the ecosystem. We first think of data, but to help it, it's good to think about different types of tangible value. So not just data, but also the money that's flowing through the ecosystem or how services are provided. Once again, it's useful to ask yourself prompts like, what data does your business and other organizations access, use, and share? How is data being shared? Is it by downloads, APIs, portals? And who is funding what? What services are being provided? In the map, we can see the design partners all exchange design data. Airplane components are delivered as a service to Airbus, who pays service fees, with the finished product sold to the airlines. We next think of value that we consider relatively intangible, like insights, knowledge, or even network connections. For this step, you might ask yourself, what insights and advice does your business and other organizations need, use, and share? How is this intangible value shared? Is it via app, email, some other way? And what networks are your businesses and others connected to? So bringing our academic partners back in, we see that they feed into the ecosystem by providing research data to improve airplane design. In return, they receive insights into the innovation processes for designing airplanes. This builds the researcher's personal knowledge and the academic institution's organizational knowledge, so everyone benefits. So an excellent use of data ecosystem mapping is to find new opportunities for your business ecosystem. Some prompts to do this might be, are there blockers in data access or inefficiencies in data sharing that improvements to the data infrastructure could address? What data is your service missing that would have a big impact on your customers? And are a lack of data standards inhibiting use of existing data in the ecosystem? So in this case, Airbus and its partners realized they could greatly improve their ecosystem, and so they launched the Apricone project to share all of this data in real time. With funding from the Aerospace Technology Institute and technology components from their innovation partners in MSC Software and CMS, airplane design processes now happen much faster. So what were the benefits to this process? Well, Apricone improved efficiency. Although the financials have not been made public, we know that some processes that used to take several weeks can now be done in a number of hours, saving easily in the millions of pounds for airplane manufacturers. Secure data sharing also boosts trust among partners, and new academic and IT partners make for more innovative design. Now we'll take a look at benchmarking and insights. So in this case study, shipping companies want to reduce the number of accidents and their associated costs, of course, in their operations. Data sharing may be an option, but the data they hold on accidents is sensitive, and sharing data could cause harm to both people involved in accidents via personal data, or to shareholders via sensitive commercial data. Using the data ethics canvas might help companies in the shipping industry with decision-making around sensitive data. For example, we're looking at the impacts of sharing data about accidents. So, positive effects from sharing this data could be reducing accidents and improving safety in shipping, but negative effects might include harm to company reputation or individual careers. But we might be able to minimize negative impact by anonymization techniques like aggregation, since individual shipping companies don't need to know each other's granular data, which is exactly what this next company does. So shipping companies share data to high-low maritime risk management on incidents such as collisions, groundings, and floodings. Hilo analyzes the data against aggregated data from all participating companies and provides these companies with safety recommendations. Companies receive their benchmark insights at an individual level, but Hilo also shares wider market insights about safety across the industry with all of their clients. This has been an industry game changer. It's providing 65% fewer engine room fires, a 25% reduction in bunker spills, and a 72% fewer lifeboat accidents, saving not only costs, but lives. Our next case study is looking at publishing open data to improve market reach. So Everyone Active, an operator of leisure, gym, and sport facilities, want to increase the number of customers using these facilities. Them and their competitors hold data on their products that, if more openly shared, could bring additional customers to their activity centers. The ODI launched the OpenAct program to convene the market and help activity providers openly publish data about their products and services that was normally closed. OpenActive is a community-led initiative that sets standards for open data use in the sport and leisure industry in order to help people get active. Organizations like Everyone Active used all the tools our toolkit has to offer. They mapped their ecosystem to find opportunities, brought in the right skills, and ensured ethical data use. Through this, OpenActive has been creating a more open and trustworthy data ecosystem in the leisure and activity sector, but has this benefited the service providers. So through partnership with activity search provider MoveGB, there are more opportunities for potential customers to see fitness products offered by Everyone Active, and it's easier to book classes. This partnership alone has helped EA gain roughly 11,500 new customers. Many of these are first-time customers, and almost none are previous members, demonstrating the power of open data. Final case study for the day is looking at addressing sector challenges. So by this, we mean that increasing access to data to grow a new sector or overcome collective challenges in a mature sector. We're going to use this scenario to show all three tools in the data toolkit for business and how they could help businesses or other organizations navigate a complex data ecosystem. So the solar power market is still growing and facing sector-wide challenges. One of these challenges is efficient use and distribution from power from solar panels. So let's imagine that we are Open Climate Fix, a new venture that wants to make an impact in this complex market through machine learning-powered predictive models. Using the data ecosystem mapping tool, we could plot out how solar energy demand, use, and supply data flows through the ecosystem, and how energy services are being powered off of those data flows. From this, we find out that there's an opportunity to partner with solar panel operator Passive Systems to access their solar panel data and combine it with existing weather and geospatial data. Then use machine learning to provide better predictions to solar power companies and the national grid on when to use solar versus other power sources, allowing for efficient switching that reduces wasted energy. However, solar panel usage data and geospatial data, especially when combined, can lead to breaches in use of personal data. So with the data ethics canvas, we can surface this issue and others and think of appropriate actions such as various anonymization techniques. Although Open Climate Fix has plenty of relevant data skills to building predictive models, there may be other skills that they are missing around anonymization, governance, or others. Here, the data skills framework helps plot out what skills may be needed to achieve the goals of the data project or strategy. So that's all we have today on the private sector and indeed our webinar. Hopefully you've enjoyed this, and please download our toolkits online, check out our full case studies and reports, and let's work together to make a more open and trustworthy data ecosystem. Happy to now open up the floor to questions.
Thank you so much, Josh and James. So yeah, does anyone have any questions?
we're really good at explaining things, so
Yeah,
sometimes
we've,
that's
I
not necessary.
think we might have numbed everyone a little bit.
Like Friday lunch lump.
Yeah,
I'll ask a quick
just a
question in
question.
that case, if there's a space for me. What's your next steps with the smart city projects? Where are you going to take that forward? How will it develop from here?
So at the moment, we have a kind of half comms, half sort of delivery campaign going on, which we're calling the Open Innovation in the Public Sector campaign. And essentially what that looks at is working with cities to run some of our workshops to help them think through specific city-wide projects. So we're starting at the point of working with a number of cities to help them think through how they can become kind of more open, whilst also, if they are interested in becoming a smart city, then just thinking about those aspects of openness. So we're hoping
Is that
they
public?
kind
Which
of
cities you're working with?
yeah. So far we've worked with Bristol City and we've worked with Coventry City. We are looking to do, I think, 8 more workshops by the end of March, which is when the R&D funding comes to an end. And then from there on, it will become hopefully a kind of ODI product that we work with cities going forwards.
And do they have to be in the UK?
They don't have to be in the UK. We have started in the UK at the moment because we think, well, we have strong connections with cities in the UK, but also we think that there's a bit more pre-work that needs to go into working with cities internationally. There's a different context that we need to understand, and so we want to build our kind of evidence base in the UK first before we start to branch out.
It's interesting. We're working in collaboration with some other people on open source program offices, OSPOs, and developing those in different ways. So currently there's a lot of work being done on those for business. There's work currently underway being done on university level, because a lot of the big research universities are building OSPOs and to create standards and models for those. But there's also talk of building them and some initial work on looking at them in cities, and it might be that if a city is ready to build an OSPO, your project would align with it. I'll follow up separately with you. It's interesting to hear about it.
Great, thank you.
I had 2 questions. Yeah, it's Christian Patterson speaking. Hi. The first question is the toolkit for the data modeling that you've just shown over a couple of use cases. Is that easily usable? Can we use it to kind of model various scenarios without much kind of technical knowledge?
Yeah, so I think you're referring to the data ecosystem mapping tool.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so that's I think quite easy to use. It is free to download on our website via either the toolkits that James and I talked about today, or as a standalone tool. We also have a methodology guide online that will take you through all the steps. It's quite straightforward. You follow the steps that we went through today. It's something that you can do on your own or with others. It's usually best to do it with a bunch of different people from sort of different perspectives on your data ecosystem or what have you, so that you're kind of getting as much insight in the first go around as possible. But it's also good to sort of try it and then share it if you don't have anyone on hand with you. And then so we usually just say get a piece of paper out, or we have printable sort of worksheets as well, and then sort of just get drawing, use Post-its, anything like that. We also use the online program Kumu, which is quite nice for making those, like the diagrams I showed around Airbus was all done on that free software online.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so thank you for that. The second question, or kind of a comment as well, really, is previously I was working through the OW2 open source organization with the City of Paris. They're doing a lot on open data and city service platforms. Their platform is used not just in Paris, but I believe it's used in several French cities, and I know they're in talks with some American cities as well. I don't know if the framework and the model you're using around smart cities, whether it's something you've kind of looked at internationally.
Yeah, so actually, I probably should have mentioned this as I was going through that. A lot of the really interesting examples of cities that are doing open well are actually international examples. We have written a report which is on our website about what we found working with those cities. It was through conversations with their kind of CDOs or CTOs, people working in kind of data and digital positions. I can't remember off the top of my head
I
which
believe
all
it
of them
was
were.
Gdansk, Rotterdam, or maybe not Rotterdam, Hamburg, Helsinki. Yeah, I think those are the main ones.
Yeah, but we can share that as part of the resources afterwards, so you can have a look at some of those learnings from the different cities.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks. And just as a kind of a side note, carry on the work, because I think there's several other cities that are also looking into this kind of thing.
Right, and if this is a conversation you'd like to also continue sort of outside of this webinar around sort of Open Cities work, we're happy to have that conversation as well.
Okay, nice. Cheers.
Thank you. Has anyone got any other questions? No, silence. Well, thank you so much again, Josh and James, for your time, and thanks so much for such an interesting talk. Next week we've got Sarah Thomas talking about open knowledge is not neutral, and that will be our last one until the September series. We'll pick up about more commercial models around open. So thank you so much for joining us today, and thanks again to Josh and James, and hopefully see you all next week.
Thank you all.
Thanks
Thanks for the opportunity
Thank
to talk to
you.
you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Bye.